Isaac, are you there? Come in, Isaac.
Hello, and welcome to a review of Dead Space 2. I'm Matteo, and I shall be your host as I guide you through the horrors and space madness that is Titan Station. This video will contain spoilers for all three games, as this game is influenced by what happened in the first and what it tries to set up for the third. So, with that settled, let us begin. Dead Space 2 is a third-person survival horror game developed by Visceral Games, rest in peace, published by Electronic Arts. The game came out January 25th, 2011 to a ton of positive reviews. The launch price for the game was $60 unless you got the collector's edition at $80. I bought this game at release for $60 on the Xbox 360, as well as on PC years later for $20 for both Dead Space 1 and 2. This playthrough was recorded on PC. Footage for Dead Space 1 and 3 is recorded off the 360 versions. In Dead Space 2, you play as Engineer Isaac Clarke, the only survivor from Dead Space 1. The events of the game takes place on the Sprawl, a densely populated civilian space station built onto Saturn's moon Titan. 3 years after the events of Dead Space 1, Isaac Clarke is awakened in an insane asylum by Franco, an engineer on the Sprawl who was sent to rescue Isaac. Isaac can't remember anything from his time on the Sprawl, and now finds himself in the middle of another necromorph outbreak. Isaac must now fight his way through the station, trying to survive against the horde of the undead and the remains of the evil government, as you're pulled back and forth between other survivors as you try to destroy the marker. That's pretty much the summary of the game, but there's a couple more things going on under the hood. Dead Space 1 answers some questions, but leaves a good amount of them unanswered to give you some satisfaction with the mystery. But with Dead Space 2, they add even more questions and answer very few of them. So, we want to try to clear things up a little bit. Number 1, Isaac Clarke. Isaac goes through some big changes in this game, the main one being that he went from a silent protagonist who had almost no face in the first game to being a fully voice-acted character. It's a big change, but it's also a welcome one, as it makes the character more interesting. Isaac is now no longer following everyone else around, but instead calling the shots himself. The only thing about this that can be used against it, possibly, is the fact that Isaac is talking more, and thus it takes away from the tension. When people are constantly talking in horror games, it always diffuses some of the scary elements of the game because someone's talking, it's not as scary. But it's not as bad as playing through the game in co-op, because that would destroy any and all elements of a horror experience.
What? What does that mean?
Number 2, Space Madness. After Isaac's encounter with the marker in Dead Space 1, his mind has been tainted with the marker code. Essentially, he's going mad with space madness. This actually started back in Dead Space 1 with you hallucinating Isaac's dead girlfriend, Nicole, but now it's been taken to a whole new level. Just that new level isn't all that great. But to give some explanation, the marker is an ancient alien artifact that causes space madness. It reanimates corpses down to a molecular level, and it generally has a pretty cool design. How it does what it does isn't explained, and is left a mystery, which is pretty satisfying. Until the third game, but, you know. This causes Isaac to hallucinate his dead girlfriend Nicole from the first game. She follows you around in the game, becoming a fully incarnation of Isaac's guilt for not saving her. Now, as you start to understand this idea around space madness, they throw more on top of it to the point where it makes no sense. Now, this isn't like, oh, it's space madness, anything can happen, because that's me and you and anyone else who played through the game, until they decided that they wanted to explain it with science, and end the game with no explanation on how Isaac fixes anything. To kind of sum that up, he beats the marker code in his head, destroying it, and thus destroys the actual marker in real life. How that works, no one understands, it's never explained, and before we're even able to wrap our hands around it, we're thrown into the fact of Isaac's gonna be dying, and we're like, oh shit, I guess this is happening. But then before even that can happen, EA busts through the window and goes, "Hey, you coming with us? We got another game for you." And it's just a very jarring ending, and playing through it the first time, it left me feeling like they ran out of time and had to end it. Number 3, the villains. You got 2 main villains in the game, with a third that you can technically count, but it's a little tricky. Diana is a unitologist and is the first. Unitology is a crazy space cult that was introduced in the first game and explained on a little bit more in this game during the church levels. Funny enough, they kind of think that dying and turning into this is our next step in human evolution. Okay, it's a little different than that and more complicated, but for the sake of simplicity, we're leaving it there. Then there is Zector Tideman. He's the big bad evil government supervisor who is the cause of the creation of this new marker. You don't learn a lot about him other than he wants you dead for whatever reason, and his reason for causing this whole predicament isn't even mentioned unless you find a text document that is missable at the last 15 minutes of the game. Tideman isn't a flushed out character and is only thrown to the side for hinting that there is some big baddie man villain that has been behind this whole thing. You don't feel bad for shooting him in the end though, if you could actually hit him. RIP. The final potential villain I'll bring up is that we kinda, sorta, in a way, fight Dead Space 1's final boss again. This is a character that controls the necromorphs as a hive mind / leader, but that's thrown out by the 3rd game, so whatever. It's a cool idea because in Dead Space 1, it was by far the best thing about it, in the sense that the whole game built up to it. It built up to this final big fight, and it doesn't let you down, and it pays off, it's satisfying, it's awesome. So to bring him back in this game was like, oh, that's a kind of a cool idea to do. But they drop the ball so hard in the end of the boss fight that it kind of makes it just ruins it. Essentially what they do is, after fighting this guy in several rooms, shooting its legs and limbs off, and it regenerating its limbs to follow you into the next room, you reach a hallway, and at the end of this hallway is a giant fan, and you're like, the natural assumption is, I gotta shoot this guy and throw him into the fan, because it's gonna cut him up to a point where, or keep cutting him up, that he can't regenerate. That's the answer, hands down. When actually in reality, you walk into the next room, you lock the door, and that's it. You beat the final boss of this game by locking a door. I don't know what to say at this point. You go from this to this. It's pretty disappointing. You meet 2 other characters, such as Nolan Strauss, who is a survivor from a previous marker incident that happened in an animated movie called Dead Space Aftermath. He's going through the same issues as you as he hallucinates his dead wife and kid, who he inadvertently killed. Nolan Strauss, however, has been awake longer than you and thus is crazier. You also come across another survivor named Ellie. She used to be a cop before the outbreak killed her family and team. She's a survivor who's just trying to escape this madness till you cross paths and you give her cause to help you in destroying the marker. With the trilogy of Dead Space being finished, it's hard enough to find comparisons between it and the Alien trilogy. The first is a claustrophobic horror experience following into the action-packed sequel of balls-to-the-wall set pieces, to the third one that no one wants to talk about. Now for the most part this is very true. Dead Space goes through pretty much the same experiences that the Alien franchise goes through, down to the studio interference killing its own potential. You may be wondering, why am I bringing this up? Well, it's to talk about the tone and difference between the first and second game.
Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. When the blazing sun is gone, when the nothing shines upon, then you show your little light. Twinkle, twinkle all the night. Then the traveler in the dark thanks you for
secret, Isaac?
I'm not running anymore. I know what I have to do. Hey, I can help you. Besides, we got a better chance if we stick together.
It's not a chance, Isaac. Other people are just a liability.
Isaac, I know you're confused right now, but you gotta trust me, okay? You're in terrible, terrible danger.
You see, with it being identical to the Alien trilogy, it means that it also has some hate between games. Some love the action, but others dislike the fact that the game decided to drop some of the horror elements to focus on the action, since that's what made Dead Space 1 such of a memorable experience. Except in this case, here the original creators aren't trying desperately to erase everything he didn't do from canon. From the functional rusted-covered hallways of the planet-cracking Ishimura, we find ourselves in the glossy smooth, soon-not-to-be-immaculate Titan Mining Station. This is the change that does shock viewers, as if you are a fan of the utilitarian look of the Ishimura, it's very far from it. But it's a welcome look, as it does give a sense of progression within the world they've constructed. The Ishimura is an old ship, and transitioning from its orange-brown grays to the blue-black shine of Titan Station is a welcome one, as it's not the only color you'll be seeing. Even though it's not hard to think of Dead Space without the interior and imagery of the Ishimura, Titan Station makes a very good point that it has its own moments too. Unlike Dead Space 1, every level will lead you to a brand new environment that is as memorable as the last. From an insane asylum with blood-written notes on the walls, to a brainwashing church, to a preschool gymnasium, Dead Space 2 takes you on a wild adventure. Because of this, the environment is constantly changing, which always keeps you on your toes and never feel truly comfortable in your surroundings. This is the main thing that brings down the tone from Dead Space 1, as you're now running from place to place having a new crazy experience and set piece. I mean, look at this! It's pretty freaking sweet. But no, you or I are scared because it's a set piece. Nothing bad is going to happen to you unless you drop your controller. More set pieces and environments were added to the game because they had a way bigger budget. It's kind of the downfall of the series. It allowed Visceral to make the Dead Space game they wanted to make, because they've gone on record saying that with Dead Space 1, they wanted to put more set pieces and unique environments into it. The sound design is top notch as always. The sound effects are heavy, loud, and shakes you to the core. Not to mention they found some way to take the stomp to a whole new level. It's so satisfying to stomp onto a dead body after a tense situation. You have no idea. The music is also a step up, from the chaotic fight music to the eerie echoes of screaming with Nicole whispering your name. Jason Graves nails it. Bonus fun fact, in Isaac's theme, Jason Graves has the scale switch between D, E, A, and back to D, spelling out dead. It's the little things that are pretty cool. Now, if you're worried about not being scared, don't worry, because when this game wants to get scary, it does. Nothing else shows this more than Chapter 10, Deja Vu. You go back to the Ishimura, and it's pretty much a best of playlist running through the most memorable areas for the first game, but with a twist. And my god, is it scary.
Isaac! Isaac, they're swarming into the ship!
Yeah, I know! I'll call you back!
There's the constant sound of enemies crawling around the ship. Necromorphs are endlessly spawning, which makes you feel never safe. and you play with the idea of what happened in the first game. It's a great level and possibly the best level in all of Dead Space. One of the cool things about Dead Space is the fact that the heads-up display is practically non-distracting as it's placed within the game world. To help with this immersion, the health bar and status bar are placed on the back of Isaac's body. But to help give this realism, everyone else you encounter also has one, and their health also change as you see them throughout the campaign. Even some of the dead necromorphs also have them on their back, but they're blacked out because they're dead. Ammo counters appear as holograms off your gun as you begin to aim them. All inventory and mission data and data logs are all stored in the pause menu as you pull them up in front of you. This keeps the game world active as you read and manage your inventory, which also allows the game to be constantly playing so you're never truly safe. They did remove the 3D map function from Dead Space 1 because all the levels in this game are now linear, and thus you don't need that function in the game. Now, if you click in on the right stick, Isaac will bring up this line that will direct you in the path of the next story content, the closest bench, store, or save point. This allows you to figure out the quickest way of where do you want to go while also taking away the 3D map from the first game. The gameplay is a third-person survival horror shooter. The team originally said when working on Dead Space 1 that the game changed directions after Resident Evil 4 came out because the game was so much fun that they wanted to put their own spin on it. So, there's a lot of similarities. Isaac's mobility is now faster and smoother than he was in Dead Space 1. The reasoning for this is the fact that Isaac's been through this all before, and he's now acquainted to the situation at hand. Some people think that this makes the game a little less scary, having more control, but after playing through both it and Dead Space 1, I have to say, having more control does not take away from the scares. It only improves your gameplay as now you can do what you want 110% of the time. In Dead Space 2, they added a new reticle for your weapons, but you can also switch it back to the original classic version from Dead Space 1. I personally use the classic version because it's what I prefer with all the lines coming off the guns. It allows you to see exactly where your shots are traveling and what's going to be in the way when shooting them. The only problem with this is the fact that in certain set pieces, you can't exactly aim onto the weak spots that you're supposed to be shooting. It could cause your death. And that's a problem, but if you're using the right weapons, you should be fine. When trying to defeat enemies, the game goes a different route as you kill enemies by shooting off their limbs. This changes the norms of games as you would normally aim for the chest and headshots to kill enemies in other games. But in Dead Space, you're punished for doing these things, as if you shoot off the head, the enemy will become more enraged and more aggressive. So, the game plan as you understand becomes to immobilize them. If you want to stop them from charging at you, you shoot off their legs. If you want to stop them from attacking you, you shoot off the arms. On harder difficulties, our best way to save ammo is to shoot off the arms, grab them with telekinesis, and shoot them back. It's very detrimental. So, you also have a stasis ability that allows you to stop enemies in slow motion, so you can clearly shoot them. This helps with crowd control as when you have several enemies running at you, you want to stop and give yourself some time to focus on each one. Speaking of enemies, we got a lot to be afraid about. We got all the basic enemies returning from Dead Space 1, and we got 7 brand new enemies lurking around the corner. Each are great and add new gameplay encounters that are terrifying on their own right. You got the Puka, an enemy that shoots projectile vomit that slows you down when hit. You got the Pack, little kids who deal super high damage and they're always with friends. And then you got the Lurkers. Not enough can be said about these guys. They are the coolest enemy to be added. Essentially, the raptors from Jurassic Park. They hunt you like a pack of wolves, peeking around corners, moving to distract you from one another, only to charge you with a scream as they impale you on their heads. It is the best. Holy shit, are these guys terrifying to fight. You never want to walk more than 2 steps into the territory, or else you risk being fully surrounded and have no clue how the encounter will go. A++ goes to the team for this one. Zero gravity sections have also been fully redone. Now you have a full 360-degree control floating around in the air. No longer are you jumping from wall to wall, running around and getting motion sick. But instead, flying around like Iron Man. Feels great and it looks great. Not to mention these areas have their own enemies, which helps differentiate it from the rest of the game. The multiplayer, it's a tacked on mode. Anyone would tell you this. It was at this time where you couldn't just have a single player game by itself anymore. EA, Ubisoft, you name it. Every game had to have a multiplayer element so that they could have a reason for players to pay more money. Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Mass Effect 3, the list goes on if you can remember games from this era. Now, not saying that these modes aren't good or have a small cult following, I personally liked Mass Effect 3 a lot, but everyone can agree that they would rather have developers cut this from the game so they could put more effort and work into the single player part of the game because that was the main draw. And that's the same thing here with Dead Space 2. This mode quickly died after launch as wait times for matches became longer than 15 minutes to wait for a full lobby in a couple weeks or so. For difficulty, there's several to choose from easy, normal, hard, survivalist, zealot, and hardcore once you beat your first playthrough. Upon each raise in difficulty after normal, enemies will do 50% more damage, Isaac will do 20% less, and drop rates for ammo will be cut in half. So for hard, you do 20% less damage while taking 50% more. Survivalist will be the same, but with your ammo counter being dropped by half. On zealot, you do 40% less damage while enemies do 100% more, and you're having your ammo counter drop in half again. Then there's Hardcore. Hardcore has the same difficulty as Zealot, but there's a catch. Hardcore has a 3 save only rule where you can only save 3 times for the entire campaign, and if you die, you reset back to the last save. This makes it hard because there's now several one-shot death enemies at this difficulty. Not to mention that you're playing through a 7-hour campaign, which means you're playing for 2.5 hours before you usually saving. And at this point, if you die even before your first save, you get reset back to the beginning of the game. Now, any of these difficulties, beyond Hardcore, can be played with a new game plus, so you can play through on the difficulty of easy as many times as you want, building up a fully upgraded arsenal of weapons and armor, and then take that into a difficulty like Zealot, and have a head start on the difficulty because you're compensating for it. In the game, you're rewarded by progressing the story progressing the story. There's nothing special there. As you play, you will unravel what's happening in the game, and you're rewarded for it with answers. Sort of.
Thank you, Isaac. Now, time to die.
What?
In terms of gameplay, you're rewarded by exploring maps as you gain extra power nodes to upgrade your gear, and also by unlocking new schematics for buying new weapons and armor. There were 3 big trailers for Dead Space 2. There was the Rorschach test trailer.
I'm going to show you some images and I want you to tell me about them.
The launch trailer.
The world is a vampire.
And the Yo Mom is gonna hate this campaign.
Oh my god! Oh gosh. I think it'll make a person become insane.
This game is an atrocity.
It's revolting. It's violent. It's everything you love in a game. And your mom's gonna hate it.
Why would they even make something like this?
The Yo Mom's Gonna Hate This campaign was controversial at the time as EA was using 200 older women to generate a sexist stereotype of women in video games. But people such as Cliff Bleszinski went on record saying that he believed that EA had knocked the marketing out of the park for that year because of the Yo Mom Will Hate This campaign. Personally, I think it was alright back in the time because when watching it, I can remember laughing my ass off at it, but now watching it, it's a little cringeworthy. Dead Space has also had a prequel comic video game, that's a pretty big thing to say, that was called Dead Space Ignition. This was released a couple weeks before Dead Space 2, and upon playing it and beating it, you would unlock a new suit and gun to play in the game. You played as Franco, who tries to reach Isaac in time to save him at the beginning of Dead Space 2. It doesn't work out well for him.
You're in terrible danger.
But it was a game that really helped build the hype for Dead Space 2. EA has never shied away from money-making DLC, and Dead Space 2 is no exception. There was launch DLC suits that you could buy for $5 a pop. No one liked them because they came with an overpowered suit and weapon that ruined the progression of the game. If you buy the game on Steam now, you get them all for free. There was a DLC story expansion called Severed. It continued the story of the characters from the prequel game on Wii called Dead Space Extraction, which was a prequel to Dead Space 1. There was free multiplayer maps that no one cared for because the multiplayer was dead. There was different versions of the game, included the base game, the limited edition on PS3, which had Dead Space Extraction, the prequel for Dead Space 1 as a downloadable game ported for the PlayStation Move, and then there was the Collector's Edition, which contained the usual woohoo that they do. At the high time, EA was wanting Dead Space to be their big franchise. They said they wanted this to be their Star Wars. They had merchandise out the woohoo of t-shirts, backpacks, and you name it. They had novels written. They had even animated movies that looked like PS2 cutscenes. Fun fact, EA and John Carpenter, director of The Thing, were originally supposed to be making a Dead Space live-action movie, but any news of that hasn't been heard since it was announced back in 2013. Other games Visceral Games has worked on have been Dead Space 1 in 2008, Dead Space 3 in 2013, and Battlefield Hardline in 2015, which was the last release game. The final game the studio was working on was a Star Wars single-player game with Uncharted's lead writer as director. EA would later shelve this game and dissolve the studio into EA Vancouver. Overall, I give Dead Space 2 a solid 8 out of 10. It's a fun time and will keep you on the edge of your seat. I wish they were able to do more with the story department and giving Isaac's hallucinations a different attempt, but I'm happy with what I got. I also wish the series and studio didn't suffer the fate that it did. We can only imagine what games we could have gotten if EA didn't intervene as much as they did. Rest in peace, Visceral, and rest in peace, Dead Space.